Lately, I've been spending a lot of time on my Switch too, and I've been playing all the latest games. And this has got me wondering, how long can the Switch 2 remain competitive? And what I mean by that is, how long is it going to be able to keep up and play the latest AAA games? So I want to jump into the topic today and maybe start out by going back to the Switch 1 and remembering one of the biggest problems of the Nintendo Switch 1 was that, it underperformed. It wasn't able to play the latest games. And because of that, a lot of AAA games, a lot of big games never made it to the Switch 1. And the ones that did were, downscaled, didn't have the best performance, had lower frame rates, etc. So that was one of the big criticisms of the original Switch was that it wasn't performant enough, and a lot of people said that, it had low adoption for third-party games. Now, the Switch 2 has came out and has largely fixed that issue, right? We're seeing a lot of big games coming to the Switch 2. We just saw that the latest Resident Evil Requiem is going to be coming to the Switch 2. We've seen some pretty big ports. We got Cyberpunk at launch. We got the latest Assassin's Creed. So all the big third-party games so far are coming to the Switch 2. But the question is, how long is the Switch 2 going to be able to keep up? And where I'm going with this is that I've been thinking about PlayStation 6 and when the PlayStation 6 is going to be released. And if you look at history, there's always been about 7 years between PlayStation consoles. I think usually it's 6 or 7 years, but the gap between, PS3 to PS4 and PS4 to PS5 was about 7 years, I believe. And with the PlayStation 5 having been released in 2020, and I know it's hard to believe it's already been 5 years, doesn't feel like it to me, but time does fly. If history repeats itself, we could see the PlayStation 6 as early as 2027. Now, I know that's debatable. A lot of people are thinking these days that Sony might wait longer to release the PlayStation 6. I don't know, we can only speculate, but if they follow their traditional cycle of about 7 years, we would see the PS6 in 2027. And so the question is, when that happens, when the PS6 is launched, when the next Microsoft console is launched, is the Switch 2 going to be able to keep up? Is it going to be getting PS6 games? Is it going to be able to handle the performance of those games? Or is it going to fall into the same pit, the same trap that the original Switch had, which was, poor third-party support? Didn't have the specs to keep up with the latest games. And if that does happen, then we're only a couple years away, right? We're going into 2026, so maybe we would be a year or two out from the PlayStation 6 launch. Potentially, we don't know. And so I do wonder, how long is the Switch 2 going to keep up? Is it going to be able to play the latest games? And right now it seems to be in a good spot. There's a lot of big games coming to the Switch 2. The new James Bond game. I think they're porting over the latest Indiana Jones game. So Switch 2's had really good third-party support so far, and there's a lot of big games planned to be released. But how long can it keep it up? I do wonder when the PS6 comes out, is the Switch 2 going to fall behind? Maybe they'll release, the Switch 2 Pro with the OLED screen that we're all expecting in a few years, sometime after the PS6 with some improved hardware. And maybe that will allow it to keep up. But I do have a bit of a fear that it will fall behind again. Nintendo's hardware for the last few console generations has always been behind in terms of performance. And I think that's been one of the biggest criticisms of the Switch, of the GameCube, of the Wii, is that they were never had, the same specs, were able to perform at the same level as its competitors. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Do you think the Switch 2 is going to fall behind in some time? Do you think it will be able to keep up once the next console generation is launched from Sony and Microsoft? Let me know in the comments below. But I also want to discuss, is it a problem if it can't keep up, right? And In a lot of ways, I don't really think it is. I don't think Nintendo's really trying to compete with Sony and Microsoft in terms of hardware and specs. I think that, what sells Nintendo consoles is their first party games and is the fact that they have a portable console. So I don't even think necessarily they need to keep up in terms of hardware. I think it would be awesome if they did. And of course, everybody wants to see the latest games on the Switch 2, and the latest games remain to come out on the Switch 2 in the future. But I don't think Nintendo's directly competing with Sony and Microsoft in that sense. I think they have their own lane with the portability factor. And again, it's the first party games I think that sells Nintendo. You know, the Pokemons, the Marios, the Zeldas, the Metroids, the Donkey Kongs, all those great first party games. So we're going to see what happens. If I had to make a prediction, I think definitely, once that next console generation comes out, PS6, etc., I don't think the Switch 2 is going to be able to keep up. I think it's going to fall right back where it was with the Switch 1 with poor, third-party support. But at the same time, there's so many ports that the Switch 1 never got from the PS5 that are all going to be lined up to come out on the Switch 2. So if you were a Switch owner and you didn't have a PS6, or sorry, a PS5 or an Xbox, the latest Xbox, then there's probably a huge backlog of games that you never played that are going to be coming out on the Switch 2 regardless. So those are just my thoughts. Let me know, what do you think? Do you think the Switch 2 is going to remain competitive or not? Now, another thing I want to mention is that while the Switch 2 might not be able to keep up with the latest, AAA games, the Switch traditionally, and I think the Switch 2, is still going to be able to keep up and play all the great indie games. And there's an argument to be made that indie games these days are dominating the market, right? Are kicking the butt of these AAA games that have way higher budgets, way higher development cycles. So we saw a game like Silk Song come out, do very well. And indie games just seem to be taking off these days. There's so many great indie games. So we're definitely still going to be getting those on the Switch 2 as well. So we'll see what happens. How long the Switch 2 remains competitive. I think once those next consoles drop, PS6, it's definitely going to fall behind. Nintendo always seems to be a generation behind, but at the same time, they're offering a lot that the latest consoles don't, right? Mainly being portability and all the great Nintendo first party games. So, wanted to point that out as well. So that's it. Just wanted to come on and talk about that topic, and let me know your thoughts below. How long is the Switch 2 going to remain competitive? When the PS6 comes out, do you think the Switch 2 is still going to be getting, the latest AAA games? Do you think it's going to be getting scaled down versions, lower frame rate versions, or do you think they're not going to go to the Switch 2 at all? Would love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. That's it. Have a good day.